AliCamp 2024. Maya Miller, Accessibility, the Diamond of the Season. AliCamp 2024 is brought to you by our gold sponsors Intopia and ANZ, our silver sponsor Canva, and Auslan sponsor SignHow.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks to AliCamp for having me. I'm really looking forward to chatting with everybody, both on stage and the coffee stream is, outside, the coffee track outside. So today we're going to talk about accessibility, the diamond of the season. For those who need it, I'm currently wearing a large headpiece made of fake flowers that I kind of stuck in my hair. And this is in reference to what we're talking about. So I have a confession. I do not know most things about pop culture. If you are talking about a movie or that actor in that thing who played that character, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. But for some reason, I randomly got on this bandwagon and have since binge-watched 3 seasons of Bridgerton. Bridgerton, for those who aren't aware, is a historical drama romance TV series. It's in its 3rd season right now. It's set in the Regency era, so if you think Jane Austen, early 1800s. And it follows the Bridgerton family as each sibling enters high society and navigates their journey to find love. And so this show, it's full of regal costumes and royalty. It's full of steamy and romance and sex scenes, oh my goodness. And full of headpieces and large shoulder pads. And so you might think of this and you say, what does this have to do with anything digital accessibility? And I watch this and I'm, do accessibility day in and out. And, like many of you probably can't take that hat off even when we're watching TV shows. And I would say actually a lot to do with digital accessibility. So why don't we take a walk together through the show. And let's meet some Bridgerton characters who would benefit from web accessibility. And now, even if Bridgerton doesn't mean anything to you, hopefully you'll get something out of it, see the diversity that web accessibility touches on people, and we'll also drop in a few pieces of helpful information for us advocates and champions of accessibility. We start off, like most seasons of Bridgerton, with the debutante presentation to the Queen. So this is when all of the new women entering society get presented to the Queen to say that they are now here and are eligible to be married off this season. And in this season, season 3, one of the first people that we meet at the debutante ball is Dolores Stowell. And she gets trotted up to the Queen and does her bow thing. And then as she walks off, her and her mother are signing in British Sign Language. And so WCAG criteria like 122 captions or sensory characteristics, they would help this new debutante who is using sign language, so maybe she or her mother is hard of hearing or deaf. So this is how it benefits these characters. Cool. All right, we now carry on to the gardens where we're taking a promenade, a stroll. This is where we meet a lot of other characters. We catch up on the gossip and what's going on, what Lady Whistledown wrote in her latest issue. And as we walk through the gardens, we meet Lady Danbury. So Lady Danbury, she walks with a cane. And it's not quite clear in the series why she walks with that cane. Of course, it provides great sass. But other than that, we're not really sure why. But we can speculate that if she has challenges with mobility and walking, that might also impact other mobility of hers in her hands. So things like stroke or muscular dystrophy or arthritis are all things that could be the cause of her using a cane, and can also cause her the way that she might use technology might impact her in that way. So for somebody like her, she might be most pleased with keyboard accessibility. And as we're chatting with Lady Danbury, I do confess to her that she is my favorite character. And so she's very flattered, and she gives this piece of advice that she says, thank you so much for being your favorite character and for talking about Bridgerton. And what she tells us is that as advocates, when we're creating content, create content that interests you, because somebody else is likely to find it interesting too. And so whether that has to do with creating weird smash-ups between the shows that you watch and accessibility, or creating infographics or videos or checklists, if that's the way that you learn and understand and like to engage with content, there's somebody else out there who also enjoys that, and it's valuable to create content for those people. Next, we go on to the extraordinary fair. So in this season, there was the hot air balloon was introduced as a brand new technology. Oddly enough, there was no fire being used with the hot air balloon. If you know, you know. So we're going to the fair, and we go into the tent where the inventor of the hot air balloon with no fire is telling us all about it. And on screen, I have a photo of that scene there, and it's all men, because again, we're in the Regency era. And in this photo, although it's a little bit cut off, there are 16 men in this photo, which 8% of men are colorblind. So what that means is that there's at least one person in this room who has difficulty seeing color. And in this way, use of color instructs us to communicate information with more than just color alone. So when we're creating content for digital, and if one of these people in the room are to fast forward into the future and start using technology, the products that we're creating online, they'll be able to use it despite their color blindness. And as we reflect on this and we're standing in the room, we're thinking about the numbers, and there's a lot of stats that we have when we're talking about accessibility. And my advice, or the advice that we get from the room, is to give context to numbers. So for example, I take this room and I say, 8% of men are colorblind, and that might not mean much to people, but when you see it in the context of the room, then it kind of starts to have more grounding. Another example of this is 1 in 5 Australians identify as having a disability, kind of a lot. Framed in another way, that's about 5 million people. Okay, that's kind of a lot. Put in another way still, that's the entire population of Melbourne. So when you take that context and you say, and somebody says, oh, well, we don't need to cater to people with disabilities. So they're saying that they don't want to cater to all of Melbourne. They're saying that if a server went down and it uniquely affected Melbourne, they would say, don't worry about it, it's fine, we can leave it down, right? So it starts to give context to those numbers that we know are really significant to the arguments and the case that we're trying to make in favor of accessibility. Next, we've been outside all day, walking in the sun and meeting all sorts of characters. Let's head on inside for some tea and some rest into the lounge. And this is where we meet the newest couple of this season, season 3. Francesca Bridgerton is one of the Bridgerton kids, like I mentioned, and Lord Kilmartin is her beau of the season. And this young couple are coded as autistic and ADHD in the series. And they're the ones who are most explicitly coded in this way, and they're not really explicitly identified that way, but a lot of fans who are watching the show are like, yeah, identify in that way. And it reminds us that other characters, as well as our users and the people who are interacting with technology, can also have these invisible disabilities. So things like text spacing, focus visible, consistent navigation. If this couple were to suddenly go online, these would be the kinds of things that we're doing in our accessibility space that would be helpful to these Bridgerton characters. Moving on, it's heading towards the evening, and that's when a lot of the climax of the show happens in the evening. But before we head to the main affair, we're going to head into the pub, the club, and we're going to get a drink just to kind of get us started off for the evening. And at the pub is we meet Will Mondrick. I think I'm pronouncing that right. So Will Mondrick, he's the club owner, but before he was the club owner, he was actually a boxer. We know this from season 1. And in boxing, like in a lot of violent sports, like American football or rugby, concussion is quite common. And that concussion can be temporary or it can have a more long-term effect. But in that way, it impacts our cognitive abilities. And so things like error suggestion and timing adjustable, those WCAG criteria are the things that make it easier for somebody like Will, who probably at some point in his life has had concussion. It would make it easier for him to complete web forms. And as we reflect on the characters that we just met, Francesca and Lord Kilmartin and Will Mondrick, we have to remember not to forget about invisible disabilities. When we talk about accessibility, a lot of the time, people's minds immediately go, especially if you're not in the field regularly, often think about fully blind screen reader users. And certainly, those people benefit from the practices that we have in accessibility. But we know for a fact that accessibility touches so many more people. In fact, invisible disabilities, the Sunflower Organization has identified over 900 invisible disabilities. And when I find that when I have conversations with people about invisible disabilities, their eyes open up and light bulbs start going off, and that's when they realize how much more impactful accessibility practices have, you know? Things like, we mentioned ADHD and autism, things like dyslexia, temporary disabilities as well, like concussion and brain trauma and all that kind of stuff. Even things like COVID brain, you know? So when we're talking about invisible disabilities, that really broadens the impact group that we're talking about, and one of the things that Adrian said before about how many people really, how many disabled users do we really have? That question, it starts to tackle that question when we're expanding that thinking and who we're talking about. Okay, now we've come to the climax of the Bridgerton episode. It's the ball, where everybody comes in their best regalia, and we have the dances and the dance cards and all that kind of stuff. And so we're at this ball, and we're dancing with different people, and we're meeting different folks, and the gossip mills are running. And one of the people that we meet is Lord Remington. So the photo on screen is a photo of this person as the character, Lord Remington, and he's in a wheelchair. This is actually a historically accurate wheelchair of the time. It's a literal museum piece that's 200 years old that they pulled out. And so it's a chair, kind of like a chaise longue. So there's like a chair with wheels on it, and then where the feet would, the wood continues and swoops up, and then there's a wheel at the front, kind of like a tricycle, and then the person can steer. And so the person who plays Lord Remington, who we meet at the fair, the actor in real life has cerebral palsy. And he's using a real Regency era wheelchair. And so what this tells us when we interact with him, we're meeting somebody who is using an assistive technology. But really, whether somebody is using an assistive technology or not, digital accessibility benefits everybody. And that's kind of the takeaway that we get as we do the rounds of Bridgerton and we meet a whole host of different characters. We realize that accessibility isn't small, and it doesn't impact just a small minority group of people. It really has to do with a lot of different people. People in this room, people that we know, whether it's visible or invisible. Digital accessibility really benefits everybody. And in that way, that's how Bridgerton also benefits from web accessibility. Thank you.
Ali Camp 2024.